Please welcome to the stage Jerron Smith, Deputy Assistant to the President.
How's it going, everybody? Doing all right? God bless this room. This is an amazing sight to see. So many friends out here doing the Lord's work, truly. I'm actually seeing some friends out in the audience. That's my favorite governor out there that I'm looking at. God bless America. Well, one, I want to welcome the Council on Criminal Justice to the family that we have here for a bipartisan leadership on criminal justice reform. I also know that Alice Johnson spoke earlier, and I always want to give a shout out to her. She's been an amazing human being to meet, and I'm honored to have worked with her on criminal justice reform. Also want to thank Arnold Ventures for your support and your leadership on CJR issues. And so, I was brought up here a little bit to talk about the status of the First Step Back, and I'm doing something a little unorthodox. I'm going to talk a little bit, but also engage the audience and ask some questions or answer some questions about next steps and First Step Back. Because at the end of the day, we only got this far because we had a huge coalition of support on the right and the left. And I think for any work that we plan to do in the future, we're going to continue to have to work and engage both sides and be a marketplace of ideas. The First Step Back was, one, I want to say Mark Holden, God bless that guy. I used to work in the Coke network with him. I worked at Americans for Prosperity for 2 years and did advocacy work. Most of my background on the Hill was in banking policy, but then I joined the Coke network and got very involved in criminal justice advocacy. And only because it's an issue that is near and dear to my heart based off of the experience I had growing up. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, had a lot of friends and family members who were caught up in the criminal justice system. And I've seen family be ravaged by the drug ecosystem. And I've seen so many talented people turn to a life of crime where they could have been in school, lawyers, doctors, doing some incredible things. And so it was by blessings and a good father that I was able to make it out and represent those voices in Congress and then later do advocacy work. And so when I started in the White House, I made it a focus of mine to get involved with any efforts that we would do on criminal justice. And from my advocacy work, I realized that it was really hard to get consensus on a couple core issues and really bring it into our coalition more law enforcement support. And so the focus for the president on the First Step Back was creating safer communities. And one way that we can create safer communities is making sure that people who leave our prison system don't return and are productive citizens. And so many people criticized us for going in that direction because we're at like a stalemate where it was an all or nothing approach towards criminal justice reform. However, we had a number of different leaders who were willing to stick, be outside the box. Van Jones, Cut 50 on one end, Hakeem Jeffries, Congressman Cedric Richmond, as well as Doug Collins and Senator Grassley, Senator Lee, and Senator Durbin, kind of our core congressional leaders that were willing to step outside the box and cultivate something that had a meaningful impact. And that's how we came up with the First Step Back. And we named it the First Step Back because we needed to kind of clear that log jam and open up this conversation on criminal justice reform in a way that it had meaningful impact. And the key part of the president was being able to bring in folks from the right who wouldn't touch this issue. And I mentioned Governor Bevin, having Governor Bevin and Governor Bryant, two criminal justice reform advocates from the states, Brooke Rollins coming from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, who did criminal justice reform in Texas, and Governor Nathan Deal, who did criminal justice reform in Georgia, kind of showed that some Republicans were committed to changing our criminal justice reform system because if you come from a religious background, you want to empower people and be a place of second chances and forgiveness. And so many came from that ecosystem. And as a result of that, that ecosystem of conservatives helped influence where the president was, because the president ran on an agenda for the forgotten American. And as a result of that leadership from the president, we were able to build a coalition of law enforcement individuals, the Fraternal Order of Police, as well as the International Association of Chiefs of Police, became some of our core delegation on the right that drove a lot of Republicans to want to support some of the sentencing provisions in the Senate. And I think that as we move forward, we're going to have to think of things that strategically based off of data. And I mentioned all of that because, hindsight's 50-50. People like to say like, oh, the First Step Back, that was easy, And the folks who were involved with that know it was a lot of starts and stops along the way, and a lot of reporting saying that like, oh, it's done, it's over with. But literally passed the legislation on the last day of Congress and was signed on the 21st of December, right before the government shut down. And took literally the whole year to get to that point. But we never quit. And so that's what I'm saying to all of you today as we, reevaluate our coalition and figure out what are the second, third, and fourth steps. We have to figure out what's achievable and based off of outcomes, and that helps us with Congress doing more stuff forward. But as was mentioned before, a lot of the reforms are in the states where you have many people in the criminal justice system. And I think that we've already started seeing many states move in the direction of creating their own versions of the First Step Back, or even going a little further than that. But what we're doing right now is focusing on the implementation of the legislation. At first, as soon as we got the First Step Back, we were working with our core leaders in Congress. It was like, okay, what's next? Let's do this and that. But it's so much work that goes into implementing legislation. I can tell you one crazy thing about my experience in the White House is that we always, as on the right, always talk about how big the government is, but until you actually serve in this position, you see how really big it is. And it's really hard to kind of turn, that boat just to the left or to the right, because it's a huge ship. And BOP is no different. You have over 120 different prisons that work very independently. And so shifting them into this new legislation has taken some real effort and some real partnerships just for implementation and making sure that we're moving in the right direction. And we were slowed down a little bit because of the shutdown with implementation, but I'm happy to say that we have the First Step Back and it's fully funded. And not only that, DOJ is committed to overfunding that we needed, because on the risk and needs side of the equation, we've done a good job of looking at people's risk of recidivizing, although it needs to be tweaked dynamically so that we make sure that it's fair for everyone across the socioeconomic ladder. However, they have done a terrible job on the needs part, mostly because most of these facilities are aging, they don't have teaching capabilities, and so we have to really build out the needs side of the equation, and that's going to really be the focus, fixing this risk and needs assessment so it's fair, and also having the resources to make sure that we're helping everybody that's in the prison system get the individual attention they need to reduce their recidivism risk. The other side of it is that once individuals come home, making sure the marketplace is open to hiring these people. And so second chance hiring is the other big pillar that we're focusing on. So if you're asking, the administration's focus this year is proper implementation of the First Step Back. Because if we don't get First Step Back right, it makes it harder to do all the other work you all want to do, especially in the states. And that's we're not going to be perfect, but it's curving that recidivism rate to ensure that at least we're creating safer communities and we can show results, evidence-based results on what worked and what didn't work. And that system didn't really exist before. Then the second piece is second chance hiring, like I mentioned before. And so what we've done is we've opened up on OPM's website, USA Jobs, the ability for homecomers to apply for government jobs while they're in the prison. And so So you can clap your hands with that. That's good. That's good stuff. I mean, we're aggressively working with HUD on some housing parameters, and we're using our interagency council, the Federal Interagency Crime Prevention and Reentry Council, to work with local leaders and state leaders around the country to create better, in the private sector who hire people, to create better ecosystems to hire people who are coming home. Because they deal with a lot of different challenges. Housing is one of them, reuniting with the family. And we've freed so far over 1,700 people with the Good Times credit provision of the First Step Act. We freed, yeah, that's good too. Thank God, I love her right here. We've also freed 1,400 people from the Fair Sentencing Act. So we have over 3,000 individuals who've come home without the new system in place, which focuses on, things like mental health, trauma, work skills, vocational training, and things like family reunification. And so it's extremely helpful for everyone in this coalition to work with us and work with members of Congress to help create that ecosystem. And so in the next couple months, you will hear us continually talk about second chance hiring and how do we actually create ecosystems on the ground where we can prevent crime in the first place by creating more opportunity, but also those individuals that are coming home, they won't have as such a hard time reacclimating to society because doors are closed to them for them to get on their feet and make a living. And so I'll stop there. I got 3 minutes left, and I'll take a couple questions. Right back here. We have a microphone, so make sure you use that.
David Jimenez, Prison Fellowship, thank you for all your great work in the White House and for having the courage to come on Tucker Carlson's show and call out his malarkey in regards to the First Step Act. Prison Fellowship is working with a lot of groups on the Hill in regards to Pell Grant restoration for incarcerated students, and all that progress couldn't have happened without the administration, Secretary DeVos, really using the bully pulpit to talk about post-secondary correctional education. So just wondering how the White House is approaching that issue with higher education negotiations. Sure.
So we're huge supporters of Second Chance Pell. We've re-implemented the pilot program, and we've had a lot of great research that we've put out about it. And so far as Congress, we're trying to figure out what we can get done. It's all really about, I think we can get it done. It's just a lot of groups want it to be a little more expansive to people who were lifers in prison. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that with some of these reforms, we can do a half loaf or most of what we want and then come back and get people. That's how I look at it. It's like we look at Fair Sentencing Act retroactivity, right? The law was passed 10 years ago, but we were able to come back and get people and have that retroactively apply. And there's provisions of the First Step Act, if we do it right, that we can come back and get people. And it's the same thing with Second Chance Pell. If we're able to get that to the people who are now, leaving and going home, it raises the chances of lifers getting it. But we can't really be as rigid, because if we were rigid with the First Step Act, we wouldn't have had those 3,000 homegoers be home right now with their families, and that's important. Right over here.
Hi, Justin Keener here. Thanks for being here. Sure do appreciate all you've been doing. Wanted to ask you, in the implementation and some of your work in Second Chances hiring, how is it going in working with the governors of the states and these states? How are they reacting? Because it's obviously, and a lot of us are working in the states as well, if there's something else we can do. But I'd really be encouraged to, or would like to hear what reception you're receiving from governors and legislatures in the states.
Sure. Well, look, there's a lot of governors who are very empowered and intentional and come work with us, and that's been very positive. It's the governors that don't pay any attention to this that we probably need to put a little more pressure on. And I think that having some momentum with someone, what we're looking at is taking the work we're doing with our FERC and doing convenings across the country to galvanize people about the importance of giving people second chances and second chance hiring. And we think that may energize governors who haven't participated as much before to the value of the policy. But we've had warm reception from those governors who are very intentional about it. So I think that's the end of my time, but my information is out there, and I'm willing to talk to anyone. And so if perhaps you got questions that you want to ask me or anyone on our team at the White House, we stand ready to work with any and everyone to help with second chances and criminal justice reform overall. So thank you all.